This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver. Today we'll talk about developments when it comes to ballot measures in Wisconsin. We're talking to J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Welcome, J.R. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
So, Wisconsin voters may see another constitutional amendment on their ballots this coming April. Republicans plan to give final passage this month to an amendment that would put the state's voter ID requirement in the Constitution rather than just in state law. The Senate is expected to pass it this week, followed by the Assembly next week. What can you tell us?
Well, basically, it's trying to take the current state law and putting in the Constitution. Officially, Republicans say that they are worried that the state Supreme Court, now controlled by liberals 4-3, will invalidate the state statute and overturn that requirement. Unofficially, they're also hoping that having the April ballot will drive turnout among conservative voters for the Supreme Court race when control of the court will be up for grabs. Remember, Ann Walsh Bradley, a liberal, announced last year she's not going to seek re-election. There's a contest then between Brad Schimmel, a former Republican Attorney General, Waukesha County Circuit Court Judge, Susan Crawford, a Dane County Circuit Court Judge, kind of the candidate left of center versus Schimmel, the conservative. They're squaring off, and whoever wins will determine the control of the court. So Republicans would love to see a boost in turnout among their base this spring. This is one possible way to kind of help goose turnout come April.
What can you tell us about the conversation around the state's voter ID requirement as it was in the past? What are the two sides or different sides on that topic?
The conversation hasn't changed in years. Democrats complain that the amendments or these kind of efforts will disenfranchise voters, those who don't have an ID. Republicans argue that they're easy to get, that it makes it, their phrase they've used over and over again is easy to vote, hard to cheat. The reality is, if you look at any poll that's been done in Wisconsin the last decade or 12 years, voter ID is popular. It likely, I'm not going to go on and say for sure it'll happen, but likely, if the polls are correct, it'd pass overwhelmingly. Democrats, though, continue to raise their concern that this is going to impact voters, especially those of color in places like Milwaukee. Republicans have dismissed those concerns, and they continue to do so. So the argument hasn't changed since the thing was passed the first time a dozen years ago.
Turning to another ballot question, in Wisconsin, currently only the legislature has the ability to get referenda on the ballot to ask voters to weigh in on amending the Constitution or changing state law. Governor Evers said this week that he wants voters to be able to do that and to put their own issues before the electorate for a majority vote. What can you tell us about this? And really, what are the chances of this going forward?
The second question is easy to answer. It's not going anywhere. Governor Evers proposed this, arguing that Republican lawmakers have used their power to amend the Constitution to their liking, that if they're going to do it, then basically residents should have the same opportunity. But Republicans have ignored a call like this before another time. Back in 2022, after Roe v. Wade was struck down, Evers called a special session of the legislature to take up basically a binding referendum proposal that would allow citizens to then put things on the ballot. Republicans ignored that call. After this latest kind of charge from the governor, they've thrown cold water on it. Devin LeMahieu was the Senate Majority Leader. He said that any policy the governor puts into the budget, they're going to strip it out. This is not really where you should put those things. Robin Vos, the Assembly Speaker, has said that Evers is trying to undercut the authority of the legislature. Obviously, lawmakers have the sole power now to amend the Constitution before, obviously with voters weighing in on it, but they're the only ones who can initiate that process. So it's not going to go anywhere, but the governor's putting these guys on record. And also, too, the Joint Finance Committee is the budget committee of the legislature. If he puts this in the budget, they'll have to vote to take it out if that's what they choose to do. And they'll put them on record saying they don't want to give citizens the same power they have to initiate the constitutional amendment process.
You're tuned into Capital Notes. I'm WUWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com. Redistricting meant new maps in Wisconsin in the legislature this past November. There's still a Republican majority in both chambers, but Democrats flipped 14 seats overall. What can you tell us about the makeup of the legislature and how you're expecting it to impact whether we see more legislators working across the aisle?
So Republicans go from a supermajority in the Senate of 2211 to 1815. Republicans in the Assembly from 64-35 down to 54-45. Will it produce more bipartisanship? Not from the people I'm talking to so far. When they look at the Assembly and the Senate, they see likelihood that there'll be less stuff, big things get done. Now, hey, in 2023, Governor Evers and Republican lawmakers came together and signed off on a package to improve shared revenue for local governments at state aid to cities, counties, villages, and municipalities. Did that. They got a big education package for K-12. Knocked that out. Brewer Stadium, knocked that out. Sorry, I still got a cold. Hold on a second. Okay. Yes. So 3, 2, 1. So they got some big things done in 2023. But on other issues, they just don't agree on stuff. And even the numbers narrow in the Senate and the Assembly, that's not going to change. Plus, two, there's going to be pressure on Robin Vos in the Assembly and Devin Lemmy in the Senate to kind of hold the line against Evers. You're going to see Republican the base. They want to push back against the governor, so we'll see how that works. The bigger question to me is, how is the Senate going to get things done, even things that leadership wants to get done? Remember, at 22-11 this past session, Republicans struggled on big ticket items. There was a lot of angst to getting stuff done. They're down to 18 votes. If they lose one member, that's all they can lose to get something done. Going back over the years, Steve Noss, for example, from Whitewater, he's maybe supported a couple budgets in more 2 decades. Andre Jacques up in De Pere often votes no on things, or unless he puts his stamp on them. Julian Bradley of Franklin has sometimes been part of that kind of more conservative caucus. They're members like that. You kind of go, okay. Chris Kappinga, who was Senate president last session, but was stepped down from that post after it was clear he's not going to win it again. How are they going to work with leadership? Are they going to be amendable to a budget that governors might sign? Or might they say, hey, we want the most conservative document you can possibly pass this Senate, and then force Evers to veto? That's a huge question for how they're going to operate this coming session.
You mentioned the budget. The 2025-2027 budget needs to be passed this cycle. It's a key baseline that Republicans and Democrats have to work together on. Obviously, Evers drafts it. Republicans in the majority in the Joint Finance Committee then take it up. They discuss it. Evers ultimately has a strong veto pen. Is there anything you see getting consensus on this year that the legislature couldn't in past years?
Well, here's one example of the challenge that was going to be faced for the Capitol. Robin Vos, the Speaker, said he wants a tax cut bill done before the budget. He wants Governor Evers to commit to what size of tax cut he'll sign before they even give him a budget or send back his budget. Look, Evers is likely not going to do that from people I talked to. One, if you commit to a number and then limit how much you can put into your priorities. Two, the government would lose leverage in the process. If he signs a tax cut in, let's say, March, and they send him a bill in June he doesn't like, what's his leverage, right? What's his point to push lawmakers like, hey, I'll sign your tax cut if you give me X, right? So likely not going to happen. Then you have Robin Vos saying, hey, from what I can tell from talking to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, the nonpartisan budget arm of the legislature, of the $4 billion surplus we expect to have in Wisconsin in this fiscal year, roughly $2 billion of that is because of tax cuts Evers has vetoed in the past. That money is all going to tax cuts, period. I won't spend a dime of it otherwise. Okay, well, that's his line. So now what? We're kind of in another standoff between the governor and Republican lawmakers about what to do. So it's going to be interesting to watch how the process plays out, if they all of a sudden play nice with each other, or if we're going to have more of very little gets done in the Capitol, but there's lots of big kind of standoffs on high-profile issues.
You're tuning into Capitol Notes. I'm WUWM's Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. You mentioned the surplus, the $4.6 billion surplus. Evers has said he wants to stabilize the child care industry with some of that money, invest in public education, respond to inflation. Republicans, like you mentioned, want tax cuts. What else do you know about what could happen with that money?
Well, State Superintendent Jill Underly, up for re-election this spring, by the way, she's called for $4 billion in new state aid to her agency to go mostly to schools. Even Governor Evers, a former state superintendent, said that's a big number, and he's not committing to it. So there's that demand. on state's finances. The UW system, or Universities of Wisconsin, now they call themselves, has asked for $850 million in new state aid. Governor Evers has committed to that. Lawmakers have said, Republican lawmakers have said, no, it's not going to happen. Another demand. So there are lots of agencies that have their hands out looking for some of this money. Again, if Robin Vos and Debbie Levenhue stick to, we're going to focus on tax cuts, there's not as much around to go around for new spending. So what are the priorities going to be? Oh, there's also this case with the state Supreme Court hanging out there. Remember, the governor uses partial veto authority in the 23-25 budget to basically write into state law an annual increase in school spending for 400 years. Now, that can be changed any time if lawmakers and the governor agree, or if the court strikes it down. The court was asked in a lawsuit challenging that amendment. Wisconsin Manufacturing and Commerce, the state's largest biggest business group, challenged that, said it went too far. So if that's struck down, that'll be the area of negotiation. If it's upheld, Robin Vos has said that might be it for education. They'll just basically figure out how much they want to fund that spending increase and go on. Because remember, that cap, that increase per child each year, is a mix of what they can spend districts between state aid and property taxes. The more state aid you put in the formula, the less districts raise from property taxes. So what's the appetite of Republican lawmakers to fund that increase going forward? That could be the only question they answer in the budget, which Governor Evers called a joke. His words, a joke. They think schools get by that much money. So he wants to put more than that into schools.
So I'm wondering, the economy and inflation were the top issues of the 2024 election cycle. Both Republicans and Democrats have said they want to do something about it. Obviously, with Republicans so keen on these tax cuts, what would that look like for the average Wisconsinite? And how are the different, parties approaching trying to help the average taxpayer / consumer / person in Wisconsin?
Well, here's a great example. It's not just disagreements between the governor and Republican lawmakers, but GOP lawmakers sometimes don't agree with themselves either. So Robin Vos, late last year, says priority was a new exemption for retirement income up to a certain level, argued that would help keep seniors in their homes and help them afford these rising costs. Devin Lemonhue says, no, I want to do an across-the-board cut. You can't help just one segment of the population. You got to help everybody. Robin Vos says, I love all tax cuts, but I like smart ones, i.e. mine are better than yours. So it's not just, again, whether Evers will sign it, but what might they send to the governor? Will it be a mix of those two things? That's what they'll hash out in the next couple of months, figure out what Republicans want to do, and we'll see if the governor will sign it.
How do we anticipate that this will affect the average person? Like, what are they looking at in terms of money back or anything like that? Like, what's the range? And does Evers have a bottom line of what he'll agree to on a tax cut?
Evers keeps saying he wants to do a tax cut that benefits the middle class. So one, define the middle class. What constitutes those voters? So that's what the governor wants to do. But in terms of like how it could impact people, it's so hard to say until we see what these proposals actually look like. Like when they're down on paper, not just an idea floating out there. Are you going to get rich off this tax cut if you're a middle-income voter? No, probably not. It might help a little bit around the edge. It depends on how big they go and where. Remember, we have, I think, 4 income tax brackets right now in Wisconsin. They've lowered the bottom 3. They haven't touched the top one while Evers has been in office. They've tried to, Republicans have. So where does the relief go? I've heard Republicans argue that we've done so much as a state to lowering the tax burden. We need to go at that top tax bracket because it's like 7.65%. And Illinois is lower than us for the top bracket. Iowa is. It's a competitive thing. Evers has said no way because that tax cut benefits those who are considered upper class to the wealthy. He's not going for that kind of tax cut. I would be fascinated to see if they could strike him some kind of deal to give Evers something that he wants, exchange that, but I haven't seen any evidence so far they can reach that kind of deal.
And what else is on the table to help the average person living here with their economic burdens?
Well, a lot of it's coming from the federal level, honestly. We're seeing talk out of D.C. about Trump tax cuts being extended, no tax on tips the president-elect has been calling for, left and right. Those things are going to kind of trickle down. Energy costs, we don't do much about that in the state level. The federal level could have an impact on those things. So, and then there's a question on tariffs. I'm not an economist. I read stuff that a lot of them say, and most economists I've read say that if you impose big tariffs on everything that comes to this country, it's going to cost the average consumer. Now, Trump has argued that that will not happen. We'll see, but I don't know if even if the state cut taxes for all Wisconsinites, if it could offset the possible impact of big tariffs on everything we import, as Trump has promised on places like Mexico and Canada and China.
So you just mentioned Trump and that administration. I wanted to ask you, of course, we're looking at another Trump administration for the next 4 years. What do we know about how Trump's last administration period, how his administration interacted with the GOP-led legislature in Wisconsin? Like, what's the policy relationship there?
Well, they're all on board with tax cuts. They don't agree on a lot of other things. I mean, look at the relationship between Robin Vos and Donald Trump. It's kind of non-existent. Remember, Trump put pressure on Robin Vos to overturn the 2020 election results, even though Robin said that wasn't possible. When Robin said that, then former President Trump got unhappy. How's that really going to work out? I mean, they're Republicans trying to figure out the D.C. level how they're going to govern, especially their majority in the House. I mean, be interested to watch how that trickles down to the state. They take their lead from what's going on with Trump. We do know, for example, that Robin Vos has said he wants to pass immigration bills, like ones that require, say, I believe Republicans talked about doing away with sanctuary cities in Wisconsin, talked about requiring cooperation with ICE when it comes to deporting people here without documentation. Governor Evers has said, hey, he's not in favor of mass deportation, so that could be a big fight. The governor's trying to argue that Wisconsin's dairy industry, for example, would be really impacted if there was a lot of people deported because there are a lot of people here without documentation working for dairy farmers. So those could be some big flashpoints with the Trump administration and how the president-elect approaches that promise from the campaign last fall.
And finally, if you had several key ways that Wisconsin residents could get involved with the legislative process this year, what would they be?
Oh, call, write letters. I tell you that lawmakers, when they get a lot of calls from their constituents, it works. I want to stress from their constituents because if you live in Milwaukee and call somebody in Rhinelander, they're not as much as willing to listen because you're not one of their constituents. But if you have if you write and call your legislature, usually they listen. That's just a simple rule of thumb in politics. Do good constituent relations. Be responsive and have an open ear. It helps you a great deal.
All right. Thanks so much, JR. And thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
That was J.R. Ross, editor of WisPolitics.com, speaking with me, WUWM's Maayan Silver. Listen for our segments every other Monday with an extended segment on lake effect, and check out the Capitol Notes podcast wherever you get your podcasts.